It was on the night of a typhoon. An unexpected call came through. It was Tom, my daughter's childhood friend. Right now, I'm in front of Anne's house, and due to some circumstances, I have Joe with me. I'll let him talk to you. From the other end of the phone, I could hear my grandson's desperate cries.
Grandma! Mom kicked me out of the house! Please help!
Why is my 5-year-old grandson on such a stormy night with my daughter's childhood friend? What are Anne and Jim doing?
Your dad? He went out with some woman.
Before leaving, he doused the house with gasoline, and is cleaning up right now. I was horrified.
Doused the house with gasoline? What do you mean? The woman who came with Dad did it.
At that moment, it clicked. I had heard about Jim's affair and his demands for a divorce from Anne, which she had refused. It must have escalated. But to think he would try to set the house on fire. I'm coming over right now. As I prepared to leave, anger towards Jim welled up inside me. One wrong move and Anne and my grandson Joe could have been gone. To do such a horrible thing in front of little Joe. I will never forgive Jim or his mistress. They can go to hell for all I care. My name is Mary, and I'm 65 years old. After many years of service, I retired from my nursing job and now live a relaxed life with a part-time job. Having lost my husband at a young age, I worked tirelessly as a single mother. I always tried to shower and with as much love as possible, but I think she still felt lonely. Perhaps that's why. And grew up to be somewhat dependent and prone to overthinking. Out of the blue, during her college years, she announced she was getting married. To a man more than 10 years her senior and unemployed at the time. Sure, we met through a pickup, but Jim is a decent man. He's handsome, a good listener, and smart. He even surprised me with an engagement ring. But when I met Jim, he was slovenly and overconfident, with good looks being his only redeeming feature. He showed up in a bomber jacket, shorts, and sandals. Jim waved at me familiarly, sat down, and crossed his legs. I've been working as a bartender lately. Not sure how long I'll stick with it, just until I get bored, I guess. Even though he was here for a family meeting, his transient outlook and lack of concern for the future angered me.
What about children? Raising them costs money, you know.
Of course, I want kids. Maybe 3 or so. We'll manage somehow. And we'll work too, right? I explained to him that women often can't work for a while after giving birth and that there's a risk of not being able to work during pregnancy. While Anne's expression gradually darkened, Jim remained unfazed. I said to and like she wasn't listening to me. You won't know until you try. Anne's capable, so we'll manage. I'll do my part in raising the kids.
We'll make it work. Mom, you did it on your own, and with Jim, it won't be as hard for me.
I was skeptical that being married to this man would be any easier than being a single mother.
It's not about making it work, it's about planning to make it work. A lot of the burden falls on the mother.
But as I started to explain the hardships of parenting further, Jim interrupted me.
Given my job, I get hit on by girls a lot. There are plenty of women out there who want my kids. Out of all those women, I chose Anne.
Hearing him speak of Anne and other women as if they were objects, I, of course, objected.
And is still a student. Can't you at least consider getting married after she graduates?
Jim laughed and replied.
I'd be taken by other girls if we waited too long.
I'm quite popular, you know. Then Anne, looking visibly panicked, said to me,
Mom, I appreciate everything you've done for me. But even if it means cutting ties with you, I'm going to marry Jim.
And is my only precious daughter. I wanted to celebrate her marriage. But now, and is infatuated, and my words don't reach her. I couldn't believe Jim would make her happy. I couldn't nod in agreement to a marriage that seemed doomed to unhappiness. Turning her back on me, and left with Jim. Later, I heard from Anne's childhood friend that they had filed for marriage on their own. They dropped out of college and started living in an old single-story house in the city. And has a childhood friend a year older than her. Tom was a good young man, close enough in their childhood to talk about getting married someday. They grew apart but reconnected as friends in college. Tom, concerned for and who left college to get married, would occasionally check on her and update me. Jim continued his womanizing ways, leaving pregnant and alone at home to go out with women. Despite this, and believed that once the baby was born, Jim would change, waiting up late to warm soup for his return. When Tom told me this, I felt so sorry for and that I couldn't help but complain in front of him, wondering if it was my fault for raising her that way. Then, when we were kids, there was a time and stayed at our house because you had to work overtime and couldn't come home till morning, right? Tom's mother and I were friends, and she had taken care of and when I had no other choice. And stayed up late waiting for Mary that night too. Even when I told her to go to sleep, she stubbornly waited. And is incredibly pure and devoted. I think it's because Mary gave her so much love. This was the first time I heard of this. Feeling guilty for not noticing Anne's feelings despite being her parent, I was deeply relieved that Anne had such a priceless friend in Tom. Then Tom looked down and said, "The bad one is Anne's husband. Leaving a pregnant woman alone and going out to play, what was he planning to do if something happened?" I asked, curious. "Why are you so dedicated to Anne?" Suddenly, Tom turned bright red and hurriedly answered, "Well, Anne is like a sister to me. If her husband isn't reliable, I feel I have to do whatever I can." I sensed Tom's feelings, feeling both grateful and apologetic. I wished and had been more discerning in choosing men. After giving birth to Joe, and unable to rely on the ever-absent Jim, fell into postpartum depression. It was Tom who persuaded the stubborn and to seek my help. Thanks to Tom, I started helping the postnatal Anne. Newborn Joe, much like Anne as a baby, was a cheerful child. I vowed to do anything to protect Anne and Joe. However, Jim didn't seem to appreciate my presence. "If you're here, I'm not needed, right? Let's get a divorce. Emma, a beauty, wants to marry me." He thought and would comply if he threatened her. But Anne, now a mother, no longer succumbed to Jim's manipulation. "Joe's dad is you. You said before we married that you'd help raise him. Let's be a family, with responsibility." But Jim was unmoved by Anne's words. "Shut up. You're not the same as before we married either. When will you get back to your pre-pregnancy figure? You've got more spots now. If I knew you'd become such a lazy woman, I wouldn't have married you." Lack of effort. You're saying Anne, who stays up every night taking care of Joe, is lacking effort? Sorry. I'm going out to buy some cigarettes. That's how Jim ignored our pleas and became even more distant, spending his time at his mistress Emma's house. Because Jim hardly contributed financially and was struggling to raise Joe on a shoestring budget. When Joe turned 1 and started working full-time, leaving Joe at a childcare center. Her feet swelled from the unfamiliar work at a restaurant, and her arms were covered in burns, but she persevered. Although not divorced or widowed from her husband, and was essentially raising Joe on her own, and I couldn't help but see my past self in her. Being a single mother was many times harder than I had imagined. Back in my day, I had no one to turn to and was always fighting battles alone. I didn't want Anne to go through the same. So, I started helping her out. Picking up Joe from the childcare center on weekdays, as well as dinner and brushing teeth, became primarily my responsibility. And Anne, exhausted from working overtime, was in charge of putting Joe to bed. Once Joe was asleep, it became my routine to serve dinner to Anne, and started to express regret, saying, "I should have listened more to you, Mom." She gradually started to regret it. "I'm proud to have Joe and to have met him, but I keep burdening you. It's embarrassing how I rebelled and left, only to realize I can't do anything on my own. Everyone needs help from others. When you were a child, I received help from various people too. Teachers at the after-school care, Tom's mom, and coworkers. Everyone was kind to me, and thanks to them, you grew up to be a compassionate person. I'm here for you, and don't hesitate to rely on me." When I said this, and teared up and nodded, "Thank you," whispering. Time passed, and Joe turned 5. One typhoon night, just as I was thinking of going to bed early, my mobile phone suddenly rang. It was Tom. "I'm in front of Anne's house right now, and due to certain circumstances, I'm looking after Joe. I'll hand the phone over to him." From the other end of the receiver, I could hear my grandson's desperate cries.
"Grandma! Mom kicked me out of the house!"
Why was Joe with Tom on such a night? What were Anne and Jim doing?
"And your dad? He left with some woman." "What?"
Tom hesitantly added. "Before leaving, he doused the house with gasoline, and is cleaning it up right now." I was shocked.
"Doused the house with gasoline? What do you mean?" "The woman who came with Dad did it."
At that moment, it clicked for me. Jim must have brought his lover, Emma, to the house, probably to push for a divorce. And when Anne resisted, things escalated significantly. "I'll come over now."
"But it's dangerous with the typhoon approaching."
"I'll feel better if I go." "That's why you called, right?"
"Yes, please take care. We're counting on you."
It's actually me who should be apologizing for my daughter causing trouble. Yet Tom apologized and sought help on behalf of my daughter. Despite having such a wonderful young man by her side, I deeply felt that my own daughter lacked judgment in people. As I prepared to leave the house, anger towards Jim welled up inside me. A misstep, and Anne and Joe might have lost their lives. To expose young Joe to such a horrific scene, what would it do to his mind? His own father, to do something so terrible. I will never forgive Jim and that woman, Emma. I resolved to make them see hell. Amidst the heavy rain, I drove to my daughter's house. A car was parked in the driveway, and inside it were Joe and Tom. Joe was eating bread in the car. Seeing me, Joe burst into tears and said, "Grandma, was I not supposed to be born?"
"No way. I'm so happy you were born, Joe."
Tom and I did our best to calm Joe down. Eventually, Joe fell asleep with the bread still in his hand. I asked Tom to look after Joe and rang the doorbell. The door was unlocked, so I could enter, and upon opening it, the strong smell of gasoline nearly overwhelmed me. When I found Anne mopping the hallway in tears, I couldn't help but rush over and embrace her.
"And it's been tough, hasn't it? You've fought well,
Mom," and cried like a little child. As I was rubbing Anne's back, she started talking through her sobs about a series of commotions. When Jim and Emma suddenly showed up, and Anne and Joe were just about to have dinner. Despite Joe watching, Jim and Emma mocked Anne for being fat and losing her feminine charm, and demanded a divorce. Still, Anne looked Jim straight in the eye and said, "I want you to reconsider. I want us to continue as a family, all three of us." Anne said. Then, Jim said,
Using the kid as an excuse? That's why I told you not to have kids.
And turned pale and screamed.
Wake up! You're Joe's only dad!
But her words didn't reach him. Emma, with a look of disgust, said,
Why bother with a middle-aged woman who doesn't understand? Why not just burn the house down?
And started spreading the gasoline she had brought in her car. And tried to stop her in shock, but Jim just watched with a nasty smile. After spreading gasoline all over the house, Emma was about to set it on fire when Jim finally seemed to think it was a bad idea.
And is probably reflecting. Isn't this enough?
He said, trying to stop Emma. This only made Emma angrier.
Are you defending her over me? Who's more important? Of course, it's you, Emma. I don't care about Ann and Joe. They're not my family.
The moment Jim said that, Joe's expression froze. He understood the atmosphere and said nothing, but he must have been deeply hurt. The words Joe said earlier, "Was I not supposed to be born?" echoed in my head, tightening my chest. Emma, in a frenzy, threw the empty tank at Ann, but Jim did nothing to protect her. Then, Jim calmed Emma down and left the house as it was.
I finally woke up. Jim said in front of Joe that we're not a family. I won't forgive him. I won't forgive.
I hugged Ann and said,
We'll definitely make them regret it. So, will you do as I say, Ann?
Ann nodded. 3 days later, a small corner of the morning paper featured an article about an attempted arson. The suspect was Emma, 25. She was arrested for trying to burn down the house of her married lover. Afterwards, I instructed Ann to stop cleaning and called the police. I asked Tom to take Joe to my house to sleep. Fortunately, because Ann was crying and had not made much progress with the cleaning, most of the criminal evidence remained. Thanks to that, the police arrested Emma the next day. When Emma was being taken away in the patrol car, she resisted violently and angrily.
If that woman had just quietly agreed to a divorce, I wouldn't have had to spread gasoline. Jim would have married me if it weren't for her. It's her fault. Arrest that woman.
She desperately tried to shift the blame to Ann, but no one would listen. Emma seems to be seeking a visit with Jim, but it's difficult since they're not married. Moreover, Jim is not eager for the visit.
I don't want to be thought of as an accomplice. I was the one who stopped it, after all. Sure, I thought Ann and the kid could drop dead, and I carried the gasoline to the house just for kicks. But I never thought she'd actually do it. Nothing good comes from associating with criminals.
This is the end with Emma. He seems to be spreading this around. Moreover, he has already started approaching another woman. In the end, Jim is a man who only dates women he feels comfortable with, without any sense of responsibility. A few days later, a woman claiming to be a lawyer contacted Ann.
Jim has been arrested and charged, she said.
According to the lawyer, Jim's charges include violating fire laws, obstruction of business, and attempted murder. The police first arrested Jim for a minor crime based on Emma's testimony. Then investigated further and found out that Jim had been inciting Emma by saying he would marry her if only Ann were gone. Jim claims he was the one who stopped Emma, but it's believed to be a premeditated crime because he had been bad-mouthing Ann to Emma for months, inciting murder, and had carefully prepared by bringing gasoline on the day. Stopping Emma was probably just because he became afraid of disaster falling upon himself at the last moment. I felt refreshed. The police didn't let the villains roam free and stood up for the weak.
For leniency, Jim wants Ann to testify on his behalf at the trial. We refuse.
And I said almost in unison. Then, the lawyer laughed weakly, as if giving up.
I thought so. I would feel the same if I were in your shoes.
I'm sorry, I can't be of help.
but I don't have a single good story about Jim that could win the jury's sympathy. On the contrary, I can provide plenty of testimony about what a terrible man he is."
The woman assigned as Jim's defense lawyer seemed to have visited out of professional obligation, but it was clear she deeply sympathized with and internally. And I were both appalled at how even his own lawyer had given up on Jim. After staying a little while, the lawyer left us with these words:
"I shouldn't really say this, but I will help you during the divorce mediation."
Eventually, Jim received a prison sentence. He won't be coming out for a while. And got divorced through a lawyer. Jim was reluctant, but after being scolded by the lawyer, he seemed to have come to terms with it at the end. And moved out of the old rented house and came back to live with me. The days of raising my grandson with my daughter are busy but enjoyable. Tom continues to come over and play with Joe. Joe seems to have grown quite fond of Tom. A year has passed. Joe will be a grade schooler next year. And the sports day is approaching. He's been busy with practice every day. But one day, Joe came home with an unusually gloomy face.
"There's a father's obstacle race. It seems like we're the only ones without a dad coming."
I was a bit surprised that such an event still existed in this age of frequent divorces. And thinking of what Joe must be feeling made me sad as well. Just then, the doorbell rang, and Tom came by.
"What's the matter? Joe, you seem down."
Instantly, Joe's face brightened.
"I've got an idea. Tom can be my dad."
And Tom looked at each other and smiled shyly.
"Ethan agrees. I've always wanted to be Joe's dad."
And answered with a smile to the delighted Joe. "That's fine. But there's one condition. Win first place in the obstacle race."
"This is going to be tough."
I lightly scolded Anne, but Tom smiled happily and said to me,
"I'll definitely win first place." "Then, may I have your permission to marry Anne?"
I immediately agreed. I doubted there would ever be another person who understood and loved Anne so well. I felt overwhelmed by how fortunate they were to have found each other. It's been a while, but I need to visit Tom's family home. To become a new family.